Climate change defies borders. So does our reaction. Adaptation versus mitigation in border-crossing climate cooperation projects. Climate change is a global problem. We all share the same atmosphere and the same planet. Yet traditional approaches to fighting both its impacts and its causes are often confined by borders and remain within certain state-bound entities. However, it becomes increasingly evident that climate change governance can no longer be limited to those traditional activities of national governments and international negotiations. The acknowledgement of this fact has led to the emergence of increasingly intertwined transnational climate change governance, and more specifically to new forms of transborder projects that cut across nation-states and bridge public-private divides. This form of transnational reaction to the global problem of climate change crosses both vertically through all levels of administration, national, regional, and municipal, and horizontally through traditional borders of politics, thereby defying our common understanding of intra-national and international relations. Even though the basic theory of greenhouse gas effect was first outlined more than a century ago by the Swedish chemist Svante Arrhenius, it wasn't until the late 1980s and 1990s that climate change became a major international issue. There has been a ferocious debate over who is responsible for addressing climate change and how responsibility is spread across countries, social groups, sectors, and generations. This ongoing discussion over who should ultimately bear how much of the burden to react to the global and omnipresent challenge of climate change offers the first clue to understanding transborder climate change governance. It is an obvious fact that climate change itself does not know frontiers. Yet traditional approaches to fight it have long been limited to national, regional, or municipal borders, as if climate change could be stopped on local levels. However, it is only relatively recently that this widespread concern for and interest in climate change has led to an engagement with its transnational dimensions. Transnational climate change governance is a relatively recent phenomenon that has expanded and diffused rapidly. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, when the issue of climate change was placed on the international political agenda, all eyes were fixed on governments to address the problem. Today, climate change governance encompasses a much more diffused and overlapping system of instruments, sources of authority, and practices. Nevertheless, transnational responses to climate change tend to be pushed aside by the high-profile politics of the international regime, contrasted with the multiple challenging national contexts within which responses are being worked out. But since climate change provides the quintessential example of a dense area of transnational relations, those answers may have significant implications for our understanding of how to effectively exert climate change governance on a global scale. This approach isn't undisputed. For some, transnational governance appears to offer dynamic new solutions to global challenges that states seem incapable of resolving on their own. For others, it represents at best a distraction from intergovernmental efforts and at worst a potential undermining of multilateral approaches. And finally, for a few, transnational governance is interesting but entirely without consequences. Additionally, this subject puts forward the question of the nature of initiatives in terms of mitigation or adaptation. Even though the transnational reaction to climate change involves an abundant framework of polycentrically governed regulations, measures, and instruments, we will focus on one particular embodiment of the increasingly border-defying reaction to climate change. Projects involving two actors on different sides of a border which interact in some kind of transfer action in order to adapt or to mitigate climate change now constitute a significant part of global climate change efforts and therefore deserve closer investigation. Despite the fact that most of those projects are initiated by governments, their execution almost always involves private businesses, non-governmental organizations, or research institutions, which demonstrates their genuinely transnational nature, involving large parts of the civil societies on both sides. In order to truly demonstrate the diversity of today's border-crossing climate projects, all three levels of relevant administration will be investigated. The national level is distinct by the fact that it has an abundance of resources at its command, whereas the regional level can truly specialize in local conditions and the municipal level has unique relations with the civil societies. Projects on all three levels will be presented in order to demonstrate how various actors interact differently in bilateral climate projects. The central question, however, is not only how transborder climate projects work and how they influence the global efforts to fight climate change, but whether national, regional, or municipal authorities and stakeholders engage in mitigation or adaptation measures. Mitigation aims to reduce the negative effects human action has on the environment, whereas adaptation intends to anticipate the adverse effects of climate change and taking appropriate action to prevent or minimize the damage they can cause. Both approaches are equally important, and there are different incentives to pursue one or the other. The aim of this project is therefore both to demonstrate the importance and vibrancy of bilateral border-crossing climate projects and to resolve the controversy whether different levels of administration favor either mitigation or adaptation within those processes. The national level is the traditional authority over the better part of climate change politics. It is the most powerful level of administration, with an abundance of possibilities and capabilities that are not accessible for other layers of administration. Therefore, national governments are those players which engage most frequently in border-crossing climate change projects, as their resources are unmatched by other players. As a prime example serves the recently launched bilateral climate project between the Liberian and Norwegian government, aiming at the creation of a deforestation-free agricultural sector in Liberia. Liberia holds 43% of the Upper Guinea forest of Western Africa, leading some to use the profits of lodging to fund criminal activities and civil wars. With its forests, biological diversity encompassing the last long-term viable population of a multitude of endangered endemic species and plants, the country is listed as one of 34 global biodiversity hotspots. With a budget of $150 million provided for by the Norwegian government and a time frame of 6 years, the project aims to create an economic environment that makes deforestation economically unprofitable and to avoid illegal and unsustainable lodging. Through a multi-stakeholder participation, including law enforcement, civil society, and NGOs, the Norwegian government intends to reduce deforestation through capacity building, creating a public-private coalition towards a zero deforestation policy. Moreover, direct payments will be piloted to communities protecting the forests, and appropriate measurement and reporting systems for carbon emissions from the forests will be developed. Based on those measurements, the bilateral project then aims to further contribute to an additional $80 million for verified emissions reduction. Norway intends to create a precedent in the region on how to work with the various sectors to achieve economic growth without deforestation and forest degradation, while Liberia is hoping for financial and economic reward in building up a sustainable development by protecting national forests, restoring degraded lands, and developing the agricultural sector through enhanced sustainable agricultural management and green supply chains. Above all, however, this partnership has the potential to finally lead to effective climate and mitigation efforts, securing large forest areas which would reduce the effects of carbon emission, both in Africa and globally. Similarly, a climate change cooperation program between Vietnam and Denmark seeks to contribute to a sustainable and environmentally friendly economic and social development in Vietnam. Denmark thereby supports the program financially and with regard to know-how, in order to reduce negative impacts on the environment while simultaneously enabling the vibrant Vietnamese economy to grow. The objective is to enhance Vietnam's capacity and efficiency in limiting harmful impacts through assisting the improvement of energy efficiency in Vietnamese enterprises and contribute to a low-carbon economy. A project in Ukraine has the same aim of reducing CO2 emissions with German support through capacity building to develop and implement a long-term low-carbon growth strategy and helping to prepare the introduction of a national emissions trading system. It involves developing models for monitoring greenhouse gas emissions and projecting their future course, thereby improving the reporting and verification of greenhouse gas activities. Germany contributes both with its knowledge sharing and financial support in order to enable the Ukraine economy to develop in a more eco-friendly and sustainable manner. As opposed to national approaches, projects that involve regional actors and cut across regional borders have the distinct advantage of being able to focus on local conditions, thereby adjusting projects to the necessities on the ground. Very often, two directly bordering regions engage in a climate-related project, as they face both similar challenges and opportunities. A cooperative project between North Rhine-Westphalia and Dutch embodies this tailored approach. Both sides provide know-how concerning the Rhine River, a cross-boundary river located in northwest Europe with a length of 1,320 kilometers, originating in the Swiss Alps, then flowing through Germany and France before entering the Netherlands. The Rhine Basin therefore brings together a multitude of different national and regional spheres, thus constituting a prime example for the need for cross-border climate change cooperation. The Rhine Basin will be exposed to extreme changes in annual patterns of precipitation. Summers will be dry, with a decrease in rainfall of 10 to 30%. Winters will be rainier, with an estimated water increase of 15 to 25%. A range of problems will follow, most notably high and low waters and drastic temperature changes in the Rhine itself, with all the negative consequences for a water body. Impacts on housing, agriculture, Rhine shipping and navigation, and thus the transport economy and nature preservation efforts will be the result. It is known that losses as a result of flooding are greater in areas with basins shared by two or more entities, as they often lack common institutionalized flood management capabilities and effective early warning systems. The government of North Rhine-Westphalia and the Dutch Ministry of Infrastructure and the Environment therefore launched the Cross-Border Climate Change Adaptation Project and CORE, Regional Climate Change Adaptation Working Group. The project aims to share knowledge by applying best practice examples on both sides of the border when dealing with flooding and climate disasters in the Rhine area. As both regions are concerned with the very same problem, this kind of trans-regional adaptation cooperation seems comprehensible and is also embodied in many other projects. The Sevinkel region, crossing across the state of Burgenland in Austria and the region of Győr-Moson-Sopron in Hungary, is subject to a co-partnership financing agreement under the auspices of which Burgenland finances Hungarian adaptation measures to seasonal drought in the area in order to protect the important agricultural sector on both sides of the border. However, regions do not only cooperate if they border each other directly. The Regional Energy Agency of Murcia has initiated a financial and know-how cooperation with the canton of Bern, Switzerland, aiming to reduce carbon emissions and to increase public awareness for mitigation measures by collecting best practice examples and concrete tools and instruments in order to achieve set goals. Today, approximately half of the world's population lives in cities, and according to urbanization projections, by 2050, up to 70% of mankind will live in urban centers. It is thus insightful to explore the joint impact of local governments, which, according to UNDP, are able to influence 50 to 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. On the international level, there is a clear momentum towards enhanced and increased horizontal city-to-city cooperation by sharing best practice examples and engaging in transfer projects. As the French Minister of Development put it, without cities and local authorities on board, no agreement will be possible in Paris 2015. A prime example of city-to-city climate projects is the Nashik-Hamburg Cooperation Project. The city of Hamburg, in cooperation with Hamburg Wasser, therein provides the technology, prepares a feasibility study, and monitors the implementation of an innovative waste-to-energy plant in the Indian city of Nashik. The waste-to-energy plant treats a daily 31 metric tons of kitchen waste from local hotels and restaurants, together with septic waste from municipal toilets, in an eco- and climate-friendly manner, and produces up to 3,200 kilowatt per hour of renewable energy per day, thereby avoiding a total of 4,700 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions every year. The Nashik Municipal Corporation is responsible for guaranteeing the waste collection infrastructure, providing land for the facility, and finding a private plant operator. Funding is provided both by the International Climate Change Initiative of the German Federal Ministry of the Environment and by the City of Hamburg, which also provides for know-how. The city of Nashik is a rapidly developing urban center that aims to grow in an eco-friendly way, thereby leading Indian efforts of sustainable urban development. The city of Hamburg is also a frontrunner of European green cities. It is therefore no surprise that those particular urban centers engage in a cooperative project in order to reduce carbon emissions. However, there is also an abundance of other climate cooperation projects between municipal entities. The Connected Urban Development is a private-public partnership initiated in 2006 by the cities of Amsterdam, San Francisco, and Seoul, in cooperation with Cisco, to work towards a further reduction of carbon emissions through improvements in the efficiency of the urban infrastructure by delivering innovative, sustainable models for urban planning and economic development. Today, the project serves as a prime example of transnational municipal cooperation projects, with many other cities being inclined to follow. The Sustainable Infrastructure Finance Network between Chicago and Basel is another municipal cooperation project that aims at working out financial strategies to enable both cities to build sustainable and environmentally friendly urban infrastructure, thereby addressing one of the prime concerns cities in developed countries face today. The investigated examples of border-crossing climate cooperation projects, though only constituting a small fraction of all transnational, transregional, and transmunicipal initiatives, demonstrates the increasingly intertwined and border-crossing nature of climate change politics. Those projects do not only acknowledge the fact that measures to fight the global problem of climate change cannot be geographically limited, they also contribute to building trust, sharing information, funding demonstration projects, coordinating, certifying, and providing a range of regulatory and stabilization functions, thereby constituting one, if not the central part of transnational climate change governance. Those projects are essential tools today for the actors involved in fighting climate change and enable broader forms of actions that defy general conventions of borders and state-bound jurisdictions. Border-crossing projects, therefore, represent an integral part of transborder climate change governance, and the demonstrated case studies, therefore, allow for conclusions on the broader level of climate change governance. The point is not that transnational climate change governance offers a panacea. They are not the alternative to the UNFCCC. Transnational climate change governance initiatives can fail just as much as international negotiations. The overall landscape of transnational climate change governance is fraught with its own contradictions, pitfalls, and injustices. But transborder projects, linking various players with different strengths, capabilities, and opportunities, are an emerging set of initiatives that are likely to continue to grow and whose effects can now start to be considered in conjunction with other areas of global climate governance. The question no longer focuses on either transnational climate change governance or UN climate negotiations, but in what ways they may link up and create potential for fruitful future developments. And indeed, they offer vast opportunities for entities all over the earth to contribute to the fight against climate change globally. While the effectiveness, importance, and functionality of those cooperative projects within the broader transnational climate change governance remains largely undoubted, the nature and intents they embody are not always alike. The question whether mitigation or adaptation measures should be, and in fact are, preferred in transborder projects is both interesting and relevant in order to understand the pertinence of those initiatives. Both the demonstrated case studies and a more global investigation reveal the nature of most climate change cooperation projects depends upon the geographical distance of the two involved actors. In cases of faraway and overseas cooperation, which are most prominently featured in initiatives involving national and municipal authorities, mitigation is the prime aim. The underlying assumption is that mitigation benefits the donor entity as well as the receiving one, as the reduction of greenhouse gas emission has global, not geographically limited consequences. Adaptation measures, on the contrary, have only local impacts, as they are constrained to a certain geographical area. The incentive for two actors to engage in transborder adaptation, therefore, is only given if both actors benefit from said measure. In order to doing so, they have to be within a certain geographical perimeter that is affected by the intended adaptation measure. Adaptation and mitigation have to go hand in hand in order to fight and manage climate change at the same time, not only in traditional entity-bound measures, but also in hugely important and vital border crossing projects. In order to achieve this balance, it is therefore important that those projects continue to involve both faraway and nearby actors. Only that way can climate change be fought and managed in the same way it faces us, border-defying and global.